The bishop assigned me this talk approximately a month ago, and it has turned out to be perhaps the most difficult speaking assignment I've ever had. And I've been frightened about it, and I ask for your understanding, I guess, more than anything else, your prayers, but also your understanding today as I share this message with you. My wife is here. She may interject now and again. I've invited her to try to keep me on the right track and to interrupt if she needs to make sure I don't get off on the wrong track or say things that I shouldn't. The bishop, and I just say this at the outset, no matter your age, what is discussed here ought to apply to the most senior of senior citizens, because grandparents have and ought to have an absolute effect, if not impact, on their little grandchildren. Also, the youngest child here, or the youngest child anybody here has, is very impressionable from the very first day of its life, and also clear up to age 25 and perhaps even beyond. Your children who are adults now are susceptible to and ought to be susceptible to influence from you, and so there's almost no age limits in the audience that ought to listen. The bishop gave me this terrible assignment of discussing with you and all of us how to raise children. And it's so difficult because I'm still in the middle of it and I'm having a difficult time. He wanted me to impress upon you, and I'm not sure of the words, I even wrote them down, or to how either that we as parents are responsible for the conduct of our children, or else substantially responsible for the conduct of our children. And I think he said responsible, but you struggle with that yourself. And that our children's conduct, actions, and activities are a product and a byproduct of us as parents. Now, there is free agency in the world, and we can't take it away from our children. But Hugh Pennick, I was going to say this much later in my talk, I don't like to drop names, but one time I was in conversation with him. We had a dinner in Houston with several priesthood leaders, and this subject came up. And he said, it was a small gathering, my wife was present in a house. He said, I run a tight ship in my family. My children exercise their free agency by choosing to come to my home. That was Elder Hugh Pennick's position. He was fairly firm. I could tell that he was a disciplinarian, whatever that word means. But today I come to you with sadness. My wife and I discussed it at length with her yesterday and the day before. I nearly opted out of this assignment, but it was so late, and assignments had been made with respect to other teachers, and the lack of assignments to pick up the class if I didn't come forward. But I nearly opted out because it's been a difficult week for us. And here I'm to discuss with you how to raise children, and our little Deborah opted to return to her mother just a few days ago. And my wife and I have tried for years and many months to overcome damage that was done to her when she was a child and an infant. And as she kept making contact with her natural people and kept leaving home, and we would get her back home, and we'd have the sheriff bring her back home. Just 2 or 3 days ago, she, after having communicated with her mother and her grandmother a great deal, chose to leave our home and go live with her mother, her natural mother. The lifestyle that she wanted to live was not acceptable in our home, and I guess she wants more freedom. I'm not sure. So Sarah and I have had to sit back and reflect a great deal. Have we made mistakes? Have we left something undone? And what about the other children? We like to think the other children are beautiful and doing very well. We wanted to think that about little Deborah. So that's why I asked for your understanding. To begin with, when does it close, Bishop? 1:30, okay. To introduce my part here, I just might say our door is open, and Deborah did tell one of our girls that she might come back, and our door's open. So we get into the prodigal son story. The story may not be over, and she may return to our home. But to begin my message, I wish to discuss the first 5 years of a child's life and the tremendous impact it has for the rest of their life. And I'm looking at this little child here, and from the very first day of their life. And I begin this now by sharing with you the beginning of Deborah's story. It was about 13 years ago. I was in my office in Beaumont, and a lady, I had been told ahead of time that this was about to come to pass. I had already drawn up documents. And a rather attractive young lady brought her little child into the office. It was about a year and a half old. And in came with them another young couple, and an exchange was made. And the young lady passed the infant to the other couple. There was weeping and there was crying. The baby was crying. The young mother was crying. Tears came to my eyes. It was a very sad experience. It wasn't pleasant at all. But we're in a cruel world. Years went by. Approximately 3 years went by. Can you hear me there in the back? Approximately 3 years went by, and a young couple called me on the telephone at the office and said, "We have a child we want to adopt." And they introduced themselves to me by telephone, and it turns out that I knew the young couple. And I said, "Sure, I can help you with an adoption as long as we can get the necessary signatures and so forth." It turned out that it was the one and the same child as the one 3 years before, but a different set of parents already than the young couple that came in 3 years earlier. So this young couple and I was preparing the adoption work. I'd already filed my petition for adoption, and it was coming up in approximately another month. Then I got a telephone call from a man, approximately 40 years old, a businessman in Beaumont. And he said, "You're handling an adoption for so-and-so." And I said, "Tell me what you know," because I didn't want to reveal too much personal matters. And he said, "I understand your position, but you're handling this adoption for them. The couple have split. One has moved out of state, the other's moved into West Texas. We have their child." It's the same child I told you about 3 years before. This was the third home, third home not counting the original home, that being the natural mother. They said they wished to adopt the child. So I made necessary phone calls to verify their story, and it was true that the couple had split. The child had been already passed on to another home. So I began to make arrangements. 4 days later, the husband called my office again. It was 4:30 in the afternoon of a Friday. And he said, "My wife and I are pulling our hair out of our head. Stop the adoption. We can't stand this baby. We're bringing it in. We're either going to give it to the welfare or the police, or just leave it in your office." And I said, "Well, here it is, Friday afternoon. It's nearly 5 o'clock. Can't you just keep things status quo as they are for the weekend, and we'll see what we can do Monday?" And he said, "No, she's driving us crazy, and I'd bring her to your office." So my mind started going quickly I knew it was the same child, little Ruby Lee, the same child I had seen 3 years before, the same child that had been in at least 2 or 3 other homes. He brought the child to my office, and there at the office, one of the most horrible things, he pulled the child from his wife's bosom, just essentially ripping the child from her body, because the child, although she had known this woman for only 4 days, she was something to cling to. She was at least some bit of what she thought was security to hold on to. And poor child was screaming as she was placed in my arms, and the couple turned and walked away. At that time, it was about 5 or 10 minutes after 5 o'clock. The welfare was closed. I think I would not have taken it to the welfare anyway. I knew I wasn't going to take it to the police station, and I decided to take it home for the weekend, and Monday morning maybe I could start arrangements. And the little child was hysterical, crying, and I placed her in the car, and she stood up by me, and as we drove off, she kept crying, and as I was passing over the Neches River Bridge, she said in a little broken English, "Please, mister, don't hurt me. Just let me out. I won't hurt you, mister. Just let me out. I'll walk home. Just let me out, mister. I won't hurt you." And I thought of what is going through this child's mind. I started to cry. What is going through this child's mind? I knew that she had been through 5 homes. There was no sense of security or emblem of security in her life. Every person that she had come to recognize the second day or a third day, they were passing her on to another couple. I stopped the car, wondering, what can I do? I locked the doors. I wasn't going to let her out. I thought of turning back. If I turned back, I'm not going back to those people's place. I knew where they lived. I wasn't going to the police station. So I started forward and drove on to our home. I hadn't told my wife or children about it. When I pulled into the yard where some of our children were out in the yard playing, they came up to the car quickly, as they always did, to hug me, to greet me. And here this little child climbed out of the car, and they started jumping up and down and wondering, who is she and how long is she going to stay there? And I said, well, she's going to be with us for the weekend. We changed her name to Deborah. She spent almost 10 years with us. At the supper table that night, she locked her arms around her plate of food. I presume to protect her food. I remember to this day the one comment or question she asked my wife. She said, she used the words, you don't smoke joints, do you? As it would turn out, the little child had been badly abused as a child in various ways on one occasion, and I'm sharing this only to illustrate the harm that can come to a child, like this one here. Important. Lee comes out into the water so they can fish, and he's standing on the pier holding the little child by his feet upside down over the water, threatening the wife that he's going to drop the child in the water and let the child drown if she doesn't do so on and so forth. And the child can hear, and the child gets impressions and understands and feelings. And this kind of whatever abuse the child went through, and we've received reports that are terrible, but it leaves an indelible print and impression and message on the child's mind, heart, and subconscious that is never erased. And that sometimes during its later life rears its ugly head and brings grief and pain. The years went by. As it turns out, her daddy was in penitentiary from the time the child was 2 years old up until the present still, and for a while yet, for murder, second murder around at that. And so she never got to know her father, and her mother was on drugs when the mother was pregnant. And so as the years went by, it turns out that the relatives lived in our neighborhood, and she presently lives not very far from here. And so Sarah and I found ourselves competing, because there is a natural inclination, an instinct to identify with blood and with your own people and with yourself. We caught ourselves teaching, going back in our family, teaching very basic, fundamental, simple truths and principles like honesty, like we shouldn't steal, like it's wrong to lie. And as time went by, the desire to be with her own people became stronger, and she kept going and wanting to go. And so I bring this full swing. With your little children and your grandchildren, as they're infants, what can you do to help your little infants get a good start? I've thought about it, and I practiced it, at least the best I could. I might say this: I'm one that's not very fond of the phrase I did my best. I tried my best, because to me it's a cop-out, because we can always do a little better. So as we go through this, we're in it together, and we try. We can do better. We can try more. And Sarah and I guess if there's anything we've learned in the last 8 months when we've been going through this experience, is to reserve judgment. Maybe some time ago we were too quick to assess fault or judgment. Not only maybe, but I'm certain of it. Still, we have to do our part. The bishop assigned me to try to impress you with the fact that we are responsible for our children, and we are. And it begins when they're in their infancy. And so I share with you, I think the greatest thing that we could do for our little ones, and that the Lord would have us do, is to love them and caress them and say sweet things in their ears, and no discipline when they're infants. Just pure love and caressing and reassuring to the little infants. I recommend no spanking of the little infants. As a child gets a little bit older and can begin to understand the same thing, loving and whispering in their ear and caressing and reassuring. And when discipline is necessary, make it swift and quick and moderate and appropriate. And then show forth afterwards, according to the Scriptures, an increase of love. And what kind of discipline? It's something for you folks to struggle with, whether it be moderate spanking or discussion, dialogue, is something you have to deal with. Naturally, to beat a child, to beat up on a child, to be brutal, is out of order. If the child kicks you in the leg and says no, maybe you can solve the problem with dialogue. You might kick it back, I'm not sure. If the child bites your hand or slaps your hand, are you going to slap the hand back? That's something you have to deal with. But I'm convinced that dialogue can solve an awful lot of it. And love and affection and tenderness to the child will solve a lot of it. I'm also quite convinced that if you let a child get away with being totally defiant to you, back talking to you, you'll lose. It's my opinion that you just cannot tolerate back talk from a child. You must do what is reasonably necessary. I use the word reasonably necessary to put a stop to total defiance. For instance, I can honestly say that so far as I know, in my family, it's been only on one occasion. Well, it became a repeated occasion, but with only one child did any of our children ever stand up and say no. And it's resulted in grief for us. And it was to the point where it is kind of like the movie Planet of the Apes. The ape Zenith, or whatever his name is, became the great hero of the ape civilization because he stood up and said no to humanity. And it happened in our home, and it wasn't so many weeks ago. I hadn't planned on getting into this, but it was the concert, Tracy Bird concert. Some of our children were to perform, and did perform the opening number. And I was at home gathering up the rest of the children to come in and join my wife and the older children, and asked them all to get themselves ready. This is a great occasion for us. and little Deborah wasn't getting ready, and I mentioned, honey, we were running low on time, and it'd been total peace in our home. And she said, well, I'm not going, Daddy. And I sensed that she didn't want to go, so I said, well, it's a great opportunity for us. It's a family affair, and we're going to go out and have some treats and refreshments afterward, honey. And then she turned to me, and she had already prepared herself. She says, I'm not going, and you can't make me go. Because she'd already been preparing for a few months for this type of occasion. And I struggled with that. You can't grab them by the hair and yank them around at that age. So, when they're little children, when they're infants and little children, how do you teach them to want to be obedient to both you and to their Heavenly Father? Quick discipline, appropriate discipline with an increased outpouring of love and affection. And you can go a long ways with that. Now, brothers and sisters, what is the greatest thing you can bestow upon your children at basically any age, from the time they're 2 or 3 years old? And the answer is to somehow get them to believe in Christ implicitly and to respect His commands. If you can get your child with a testimony of the gospel to fear God's commands, you nearly have the problem solved. Because then when the child is alone, down and out, depressed, despondent, on a business trip, in a foreign land like Joseph, who was sold into Egypt, having been abandoned, his brothers, some of them wanted to kill him, others were willing to sell him and did sell him, and when your child is in the dormitory at Boys State, and a girl is ushered in his room, or your girl is at a place and some bad things are going on around, if they have that basic, strong testimony of the gospel, they can say, as Joseph of Egypt said, I cannot, I will not offend my God. So, teach them from their infancy, in your prayers with them, and in your home evenings, and around the table. Be verbal and vocal in these basic concepts of the gospel. We caught ourselves in our family. You see, a strange thing happened. We discovered, as Sarah and I reviewed, that we have never had to tell our children, don't steal. It's wrong to steal. We had never told any of our boys. I'm quite sure that Steve would say he never heard me say to him, don't steal, don't smoke, don't take drugs. I never told him, don't take drugs. I never had to tell Steve, don't take a girl to a motel. Don't take your pants down. Don't commit suicide. It's wrong. And we've examined why. And it's because we approach it on other angles. Instead of don't commit suicide, we would teach them toughen up. Learn to take it on the chin when things go bad. We wouldn't say don't commit suicide. That's a cop-out. We would teach them, become thick-skinned. You're going to get kicked around and abused all your life, so learn to roll with the punches and do it without complaining. We would teach them that. But suddenly we caught ourselves in our family going back to the very basics. It's absolutely wrong to take something that belongs to somebody else. Several months ago, we caught ourselves, it occurred to us that somebody in our family doesn't understand. And so you may have to get back to the basics and teach it a different way. It is wrong to take something that belongs to somebody else. It's stealing. It's displeasing to God. It's something that can get you locked up in jail. And then the same thing about drugs. So we caught ourselves trying to make sure that all of our children had a grasp of why it was important. We caught ourselves teaching there is a God in heaven for beginners. In other words, we went through 1 or 2 or 3 home evening lessons, matter of fact, put together by myself, good ones, on the nature of God, that there is a God in heaven. He lives. We're going to account to Him for our conduct. There's going to be a resurrection. if your child has a hard time recognizing right and wrong, you may have to get back to some fundamentals, like there is a resurrection. You're going to meet your Maker one day. The meaning of life. Another lesson. We went through the whole plan of salvation. And the demonstrations, the kit, the bulletin board, or the thing, and all of it was there. I like to think that it helped. Basic testimony of the gospel. Because if they don't have it, they will coast along on their popularity, they'll coast along on their buddies for a while, and on their parents, and on their parents' name. But sooner or later, that child's going to be left standing on its own something. And if it has the testimony of the gospel, maybe that child will be able to say, as Joseph of Egypt did, "No, I will not offend my God." And maybe he or she can say it even when they're at girls' state or at boys' state. And I could give you some hairy stories of some very dear people of ours who have been sorely tempted and had the fortitude to turn the evil away when they were in unusual circumstances. And then there are sad stories where friends didn't have the fortitude to turn away. And then they become self-destructive, and they say things like, "I don't care if I get pregnant. I don't care if I go to hell." And they begin to think as Satan would like them to think, and that is that all is lost, it's over, it's too late. But I'm going to go ahead and interject a story about my mother and two of my brothers that shows it's not over, it's not too late. Because one of my brothers fell out for 15 years. It was a very grieving thing to the family. And a bishop and a home teacher found him and caught him in California, and he had a wife that wasn't a member of the Lord's church, and he had a can of beer behind his back, and the bishop called him to an assignment, and I forgot what the assignment was. What, please?
Boy Scout leader.
Boy Scout leader, of all things? The Boy Scout leader. And he said, "I guess I'll have to get rid of this." And he did. And to this day, he is sealed to that same wife in the temple, and all of his children are true and faithful. And his grandchildren. He has 4 beautiful sons, all Eagle Scouts, all returned missionaries, and they're all very secure in their respective professions and have beautiful families. But the cases don't always end with a happy ending, totally. The second brother, not the second one in order, but another brother, he also fell out. And he was out for almost 15 years. And he didn't fall out until after he had gone through the Navy and came home and got married in the temple, and everything was great. And then he fell out. Because in his work he was a salesman and got traveling too much and got lonely and depressed and was not able to do as Joseph of Egypt did. And it ended very sad. A divorce, he lost his children. But then after 15 years, a home teacher caught him. Bishop couldn't, we couldn't, a home teacher did. And brought him back around. He saw the light. He is, like I say, they don't always end happily. But in his case, he is happily sealed in the temple to a beautiful wife. And he's very active in his priesthood work, and he and his wife have temple recommends. But his children are out, and maybe some great home teacher or bishop or Relief Society visiting teacher or president will find them. I'm just illustrating, brothers and sisters, we can't quit. And that's why our door is still open. And we can't quit because years later, when it starts to dawn on them, some of these teachings that we shared with little Deborah may begin to distill on her mind, and she may say that is right. It is worth it to leave these things alone. And some visiting teacher may help her come back. A couple of other things. Gaining a testimony of the gospel. The four sons of Mosiah and Alma, they fought against their fathers. They fought against the church. They were evil. They were vile people. They were unlike Saul, who became the Apostle Paul. He fought against the church. He thought he was doing right. When he was struck down and was converted, he continued to do what he knew was right then. He became a very great and valiant person. But I'm trying to illustrate what a testimony of the gospel can do. The four sons of Mosiah and Alma, they were converted, finally, through this miraculous experience. And from that moment on, they stood on their feet and proclaimed righteousness and lived righteously. Whereas before they were converted, they were wicked. So we have to convert. We have to help our children to become converted. It's the best and greatest saving principle for our children. Is to teach them the basic principles of the gospel, help them believe it, and that it's worth it to obey. You can't let them just float through junior high and high school. It's too hard. Now, there's a scripture that says, "My sheep hear my voice." He speaks of the goats, and he speaks of the sheep. If any of our children are goats, let's do everything in our power to transform them into sheep, and sheep that hear the Lord's voice. Sometimes it's pretty hard. First, testimony of the gospel. In my opinion, perhaps the second best thing you can do to help your children through is to have the proper attitude about them and let them feel that same attitude. And that is, we have to come to see our children as royalty. Absolute royalty. Sons and daughters of God, greater than any sons and daughters of any king or queen on earth. That these children are of divine heritage. That we have been entrusted with them as their tutors. It's an awesome responsibility. And if we come to grips with our assignment, that we are to tutor this great and noble servant of God, who is probably greater than I will ever become, then we can exercise compassion and restraint in how we handle them. And continually say to yourself when it gets difficult, I too was once a child. I too was once a child. I do that. I've done that all my married life. I too was once a child. Be careful about working this kid over, because he is doing less than I used to do about tearing things up. I too was once a little brat. So be careful, Bernie. And besides that, I'm dealing with possibly one of the Lord's very special and chosen. And he has assigned me to be a steward for this child and to raise it. I'm not just talking in fancy words. Over the years, I've practiced and I actually come to believe that. And I can truthfully say, and we all ought to do this, when the child is in your home and a visitor comes, the child is more important than the visitor. And we ought to see it that way and speak with respect to the child. For instance, some phrases and labels ought to be absolutely off limit in your home. And I can honestly say that in our home, the word hate has essentially never been uttered, except in a few instances from a 2 or 3 year old and recently from one of our children. And it was said a few times. But Sarah and I have never used it. And it's just absolutely off limits, the word hate. And even the little children didn't, because they didn't even know the word. In other words, it was not in our home vocabulary. The word stupid, dumb, idiot, moron, they're off limits. They're labels that will destroy a child's self-image. So they're like swear words. They're like profane words to us. Get rid of them, keep them out of the home. They will damage a child's self-image. We want our children to have a high self-esteem so that our children will think they are special. And they can if we say the right things to them. and keep reminding them. If we come to think our child is of noble, even godly lineage, and that child has been entrusted to us for a period of time, then it's easier to address the child with respect. I was very impressed with a Jewish lawyer friend of mine many years ago. 12-year-old child, my wife and I were at a bar mitzvah, and the 12-year-old son began to speak, and the lawyer immediately diverted his attention. He's a good friend of mine, Carl Waldman. I worked with him, and he's a dear friend of mine. And he diverted his attention from his fellow lawyers directly to that child. We were impressed. He wanted to hear the child out. And I respect parents who do that, even when there's company, the child tugs on him, wants to say something, slice your attention. Because the child is more important than the company, usually. If we would respect the child's opinion, here I'm getting into the teenage years, respect the child's opinion, hear the child out, give the child full faith and credit for its opinion. I've got to hurry on. Building self-esteem is another subject. You can build your self-esteem in a child by saying good things to the child and reassuring the child. My wife did it for Dan. Dan, our fourth son, had a hard time in high school, and he was crying. His grades were poorer than his older brothers. It's the only time we know of that he cried. He actually uttered the opinion that he might not be able to make it in college. She took him to the side and she said, Dan, I don't want you to ever hear you talk like that again. You have a mind that's swifter and brighter than almost anybody's. You have great things ahead of you. Well, I don't know what happened, but he's in college and law school, and he's right up there toward the top. He's sharp as a tack. I went to little Deborah, and she felt despondent because of her vocal problems, her voice, lack of singing voice. And I said, listen, honey, you, more than anybody else in our whole family, Mama, any of the girls, are the best cook. And it was true. I mean, she's just a young girl, but she was a very good cook. And furthermore, you know, you're a domestic. You're the most domestic of the lot. And you keep a very nice kitchen. You're organized. And you're going to be a real joy to some husband if you keep this sort of thing up and keep yourself nice because you're such a great cook. And she found great comfort in that and kept practicing and kept cooking. And even now, since she left, she placed a phone call. Her first request was, can I have a recipe? Communications. Above all, be friends with your son and daughter and communicate. Communicate with them. Some children say, I can't talk to my parents because they wouldn't understand. It's the only time I ever heard that was from the one child. You wouldn't understand me. And those things really surprised me because I thought I understood children. But I hope that you can communicate with your children and that they understand you and you understand them. And when you do it, when you're dealing with the children, I've got 12, 14 minutes. When you're dealing with them, if you begin to get exasperated, here's the rule that I've applied to myself for 27 years, since the day Steve was born and he was pulling everything out of the cupboard 6 months after that. If they get your goat, you've lost. If you lose your composure, you've lost. If your child gets the best of you and causes you to get worked up and rail on the child, you've lost. We are adults, and we just have to have more character to us than to let a child get our goat. That means cause us to go berserk. You going to be all right on that, folks? Their baby did a lot of crying before they changed the formula. And you about went berserk. Just don't let the child get your goat. Have enough fortitude about yourself to keep your composure and stand back and say, look, I was once a child too. So then you approach the child a different way and you say, let's reason together. Let's talk about it. Brothers and sisters, inject a great deal of humor and fun into your home life. And maybe we've done it wrong. I'm not sure. We're kind of party people, and we've had lots of fun in our home. But our kids have enjoyed it. Mama just the other night, she was up there. The girl said, "Mama, let's go somewhere to Beaumont and eat." It was late at night, after midnight, to Denny's, and she went, and they had it created a bond between her and the teenage girl. They laughed, cut up, they were silly, and she'd come home, and if they get to bed at 2 or 3, it was holiday time, so they sleep in the next day. But she made miles. She covered miles with those girls. They loved her. I was glad to hear about it. I had a chance to go, but I said I better stay here with the little one. One of my sons told me of a conversation with the other son, this is between David Van up there at the Y, that the one son said, "I'm going to stay on the track best I can, if for no other reason. I don't want to hurt Dad and Mom. And if you can build enough of a bond that they'll stay close to you, for that reason, it's good enough. It's better than nothing." Give them plenty of freedom. If you shackle them, and if you shackle them too tightly, it's like a workhorse. Dale Forte, President Forte would know. You pull the reins too tight, they're going to buck and they go crazy. Give them enough freedom. Yet, if you don't hold the reins tight enough, they won't get the job done. Our object is to get our children as far as Sarah and I are concerned, among other objects, I guess, our primary object is to get them to the temple with a temple-worthy spouse as virgins. I suppose one could say get them to the temple, to be married in the temple. So in doing that, I want to cover briefly something that I think the bishop was anxious about, and it's how to say no and teach our children to just say no. How can we say no to our children and keep them on our side? And there's a few don'ts. If you say to the child too many times, "because I said so," it's going to weaken the bond. If you pull rank on them very many times, you've got to save the heavy-duty no's for the most serious blows. Because if you overuse them, "No, you can't have a sandwich." Instead of saying, "No, you can't have a sandwich," say, "Honey, would you fix me one also?" "No, you can't go outside." "No, you can't even play the game. I'm tired of the noise." "I realize it's Friday night. Turn the TV off." The answer is no, no, no. It begins to create a complex. So back off and save your no's for heavy-duty material. Instead of saying no all the time, and don't say, "because I said so, I'm the boss," and be really careful about saying, "because I prayed about it, and the Lord told me no." Because if you overdo that, they're going to resent somebody that you don't want them to resent. If you continually throw at them, "because I prayed and the Lord said no," they're going to say, "Don't tell me what the Lord said. And if you also overdo this, "because the prophet said no," they can come to resent the prophet. So be careful. Make sure your child is mature enough to handle that. For instance, quite a discussion between my college boys. The one college boy said, "The prophet said it just recently, no studying on Sunday." And the other son was given, "Well, he didn't exactly say that. He said unless. No studying on Sunday unless," or "don't overdo it." So if you tell your children only one kiss per date because the prophet said so, be careful. If you say no kissing at all until you're at the altar because the prophet said so, there's different prophets, so be careful. But there are ways you can do it, and that is say, "Wait, whoa. Let's talk about this." Instead of saying no, say, "Whoa, let's talk about this." That's how we try to do it. Let's talk about this. Or maybe there's some other alternatives. Or what about the other kids? I mean, are they going to want to go too? Or are we setting a precedent? Is this going to lead us into some pretty tight situations down the road? And you can reason with them about this and try to get them to come up with the right answer instead of you're having to say no. What you want to do when you have to turn them down or when you have to say no is try to give them the strength, the experience, the fortitude to be willing to just say no themselves when faced with a tough situation. And you get that with your high school kids. If you have to say no, you cannot read that filthy magazine, then when the child's at school, he's not going to just say no. You've got to sit down and reason with him, working that. If the magazine never got in your home in the first place. A couple of things you do want to accomplish. One is to save face with the child while you're dealing with it. Let them come up with the right answer. Help them remember who they are, their divine nature. Finally, brothers and sisters, let's be fair to our children and not call it quits when they get out of high school. Let's not give up or think we're done when they graduate from high school. Let's be fair to them and become finishers. Let us be finishers. Polish them off. Help them polish themselves to be worthwhile citizens for the heavenly and servants for the Heavenly Father. And it can turn into a very high phone bill for you to monitor your son or daughter at college, or wherever they are, working, wherever they may be, whether it's in Phoenix with Bishop Williamson's daughter, or BYU, or in the military. If you monitor your child, let them know that you're interested. You're involved. You know who they're dating. You can give an impression. I mean, one of our sons actually said, I became disinterested in her because my brothers and my parents had reservations about her. And he let her go because others were interested in his well-being. Very significant thing. This is a here and now situation, a recent one within the last year, that he disassociated himself from a girl that his brothers and sisters and parents were not had reservations about. So be active. Be fair to them to help them become, as it says on TV, the best they can be, as far as they can go. In whatever field, profession, activity, trade, craft, be finishers. I pray for all of us. I conclude now just by saying that we're in this together. And Sarah and I catch ourselves wondering if we're doing it right, and have we done it right, and what shall we do now, and we don't have all the answers. But in conclusion, if we will remember who we are and who gave us the assignment, and plead with Him for help and for wisdom and inspiration, and that somehow He, our Heavenly Father, will touch the heart of our troubled child. We're entitled to His blessing. He knows what we're going through because He has been through it. And I think He's on our side. I mean, I've said that He's on our side, and I think He will help us when we're down and out, and He'll help pick up our children. Even if it takes years. I pray for us in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you very much, Brother Patrick. We want you to know that we care about you, we care about your family, we care about your children. We love you and we're concerned, and we have a deep, deep concern for our responsibilities to your children and your families. And we hope that you remember the message that President Packard delivered on the request of the bishop, and that was that our children are a product of their parents. as you see yourself and see how you want your children to come out as the example that you set, this is the example and what your children are going to carry forth in their life and their relationship throughout their lives. And we hope that you take this instruction as what it was meant for your help and care and consideration. We love you and we care about you. So Joe Williams is going to give you. Thank you.
Our Father in heaven, we pray, Father, our blessings to be upon us for saints here, and the parents, and grandparents, and prospective parents here, Lord Lord. That thou would bless us, Father, with our blessings and inspiration and knowledge concerning the affairs of raising our children and seeking to give them a testimony of our gospel and raising in righteous paths. We pray thy blessings upon all of us to this end, Father, in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
and teach our children to just say no? How can we say no to our children and keep them on our side? And there's a few don'ts. If you say to the child too many times, because I said so, it's going to weaken the bond. If you pull rank on them very many times, you've got to save the heavy-duty no's for the most serious blows. Because if you overuse them, no, you can't have a sandwich. Instead of saying, no, you can't have a sandwich, say, honey, would you fix me one also? No, you can't go outside. No, you can't even play the game. I'm tired of the noise. I realize it's Friday night. Turn the TV off. The answer is no, no, no. It begins to create a complex. So back off and save your no's for heavy-duty material. Instead of saying no all the time, and don't say because I said so, I'm the boss, and be really careful about saying because I prayed about it and the Lord told me no. Because if you overdo that, they're going to resent somebody that you don't want them to resent. If you continually throw at them because I prayed and the Lord said no, they're going to say, don't tell me what the Lord said. And if you also overdo this because the prophet said no, they can come to resent the prophet. So be careful. Make sure your child is mature enough to handle that. For instance, quite a discussion between my college boys. The one college boy said, the prophet said it just recently, no studying on Sunday. And the other son was given, well, he didn't exactly say that. He said, unless. No studying on Sunday unless, or don't overdo it. So, if you tell your children only one kiss per date because the prophet said so, be careful. If you say no kissing at all until you're at the altar because the prophet said so, there's different prophets, so be careful. But there are ways you can do it, and that is say, wait, whoa, let's talk about this. Instead of saying no, say, whoa, let's talk about this. That's how we try to do it. Let's talk about this. Or maybe there's some other alternatives. Or what about the other kids? I mean, are they going to want to go too? Or are we setting a precedent? Is this going to lead us into some pretty tight situations down the road? And you can reason with them about this and try to get them to come up with the right answer instead of you're having to say no. What you want to do when you have to turn them down or when you have to say no is try to give them the strength, the experience, the fortitude to be willing to just say no themselves when faced with a tough situation. You get that with your high school kids. If you have to say no, you cannot read that filthy magazine, then when the child's at school, he's not going to just say no. You've got to sit down and reason with him, won't you? If the magazine never got in your home in the first place. A couple of things you do want to accomplish. One is to save face with a child while you're dealing with it. Let them come up with the right answer. Help them remember who they are, their divine nature. Finally, brothers and sisters, let's be fair to our children and not call it quits when they get out of high school. Let's not give up or think we're done when they graduate from high school. Let's be fair to them and become finishers. Let us be finishers. Polish them off. Help them polish themselves to be worthwhile citizens for the heavenly and servants for the Heavenly Father. And it can turn into a very high phone bill for you to monitor your son or daughter at college, or wherever they are, working, wherever they may be, whether it's in Phoenix, Bishop Williamson's daughter, or BYU, or in the military. If you monitor your child, let them know that you're interested. You're involved. You know who they're dating. You can give an impression. I mean, one of our sons actually said, I became disinterested in her because my brothers and my parents had reservations about her. And he let her go because others were interested in his well-being. Very significant thing. this is a here and now situation, a recent one within the last year, that he disassociated himself from a girl that his brothers and sisters and parents were not had reservations about. So be active. Be fair to them to help them become, as it says unto thee, the best they can be, as far as they can go. In whatever field, profession, activity, trade, craft, be finishers. I pray for all of us. I conclude now just by saying that we're in this together. And Sarah and I catch ourselves wondering if we're doing it right, and have we done it right, and what shall we do now, and we don't have all the answers. But in conclusion, if we will remember who we are and who gave us the assignment, and plead with Him for help and for wisdom and inspiration, and that somehow He, our Heavenly Father, will touch the heart of our troubled child. We're entitled to His blessing. He knows what we're going through because He has been through it. And I think He's on our side. I mean, I said that He's on our side, and I think He will help us when we're down and out, and He'll help pick up our children. Even if it takes years. I pray for us in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you very much, Brother Patrick. We want you to know that we care about you, we care about your family, we care about your children. We love you, and we're concerned, and we have a deep, deep concern for our responsibility to your children and your families. And we hope that you remember the message that President Packard delivered on the request of the bishop, and that was that our children are a product of their parents. As you see yourself and see how you want your children to come out as the example that you set, this is the example and what the children are going to carry forth in their life and their relationship throughout their lives. And we hope that you take this instruction as what it was meant for your help and care and consideration. We love you and we care about you. So till we
Our Father in heaven, we pray, Father, our blessings to this home for saints here and their parents and grandparents and respective parents here in our ward. That thou would bless us, Father, with thy blessings and inspiration and knowledge concerning the affairs of raising our children and seeking to give them a testimony of thy gospel and raise them in righteous paths. We pray thy blessings upon all of us to this end, Father, in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.